A friend of mine asked me if I could recreate the barn where his father grew up. I thought this would not only be a great exercise for me, but also an opportunity to go over the basics of scratch building with styrene. Styrene is short for polystyrene, a thermoplastic that becomes soft when heated, can be bent or molded, is easy to cut, and modeling cement bonds to it almost instantly. It comes in many different shapes and sizes, including cylinders and tubes, many different sizes, including solid or hollow, strips for detail that go up in size to larger planks, which are great for adding detail and even building up bulk for various types of models and buildings, and even channels. For larger panels, there are sheets available with various textures, including grooves and even corrugated. Finally, in my stash, there are I-beams and C-channels for even more detail. And you can make some of this yourself if you have the time, but these are a lot easier. For this project, I started with a single sheet with V grooves. You'd be surprised how far one sheet can go with proper planning. I marked out all the shapes I needed before scoring the plastic, a few swipes, and it breaks cleanly with even pressure. After I had all my shapes, I laid everything out to make sure I had enough material for the entire project. When you glue styrene, you want to use thin cement and make sure the workspace is protected. Especially when gluing butt joints like this, the thin type cement will seep through and get on everything. It will also weep across the back of the piece you are gluing and glue itself to the work surface. So use a piece of tape or something else that you can easily clean up when gluing all this together. The cement actually melts the plastic, so you'll want to apply even pressure to the piece while it's gluing and until it dries. Styrene is also great for carving. These small beams become wood beams just with some added detail and scoring. Once that's glued in place, just like everything else, it'll look like you used a piece of timber. I tried to create some depth with this build to give it a little bit more interest, just so it's not a flat barn. And you can see here, it's very easy to add small details that will make something look that much more interesting. In this day and age with 3D printers, I think it's easy to start designing and printing everything and every detail. Now, with something larger and more chunky like this, using styrene works great. It takes much less time than designing and printing something on a printer, and especially with these flat building structures, you can pull a lot of detail just out of the basic shapes that you're given. But who am I kidding? I still use the 3D printer from time to time for more intricate designs that would have taken a lot of work to scratch build. I'm setting this all in a piece of foam so I can carve some slight slopes into it, and I just wanted to make sure that everything was going to fit. So drawing out your base and making some measurements is key. That way everything stays square and goes together exactly how you want it. The last thing you want is your barn to look like it's floating in the air. Sometimes you have to add details like this just to make sure the structure is adequate, and adding details that you might not even see help as well. Again, I used one large corrugated sheet for the entirety of the roof. Here, planning is key. Everything got scored. This cut a little bit easier because it's slightly thinner. And I overlapped each one of the joints just to make sure the glue had something to adhere to. After that, I just used the leftovers to fill in all the gaps and test fit it to the rest of the structure. And with a little bit of cement, everything held in place. Here I'm just building a simple fence, and you can see after scoring one large piece, you can cut it into smaller pieces, and as you add the details, it really starts to look like the real thing. A few more details with some handles. And for the cap on the roof, I did use a little copper foil. I couldn't resist 3D printing another light. Now it's on to the diorama stage of this. And I gave the ground some texture with cellular clay. And because this is a gift, I wanted to make sure that the base was as nice as possible. So I made a wooden frame to put the foam into. Then I carefully cut all the wood that rose above the groundwork. Make sure not to cut towards any of your appendages or yourself while you are doing this. Since this is meant to depict a working barn in its heyday, get it? I had to add some hay in the form of 7mm static grass. And while that dried, I painted the roof with Alclad's chrome lacquer. This stuff is amazing. Then I moved on to paint the iconic red barn. I used a scrap of cardstock to highlight the various panels to show more depth. Then I finished with a wood tone for the post and fence. With that done, I covered the groundwork with AK's terrain paste, Muddy Ground. This dries a little bit flat, but we'll fix that later when we paint the rest of it. Once this was dried, I added static grass with my static grass applicator and made sure that all the tufts were looking sufficiently overgrown. I also added World War Scenic's self-adhesive heather tufts. Then added more hay to the front of the barn where it would have spilled out. Now it was time to add some variation to the groundwork by wet blending lighter brown tones. I tried to avoid using every last bit of my painter's tape by hand painting all the white trim. This, however, did not prove to be sufficient. After many coats, I still could not get it to look nice, bright, and white. So, after painting the details on the light, I decided to go back over everything with my airbrush, which meant taping up just about everything. But it turned out much nicer, and it gave a much nicer finish. Plus, I then had the benefit of ripping all of that tape off again, which, as we all know, is extremely satisfying. Last one. Before I attached the barn to the base, I wanted to make sure I could paint all the hay that was going to be in both the exterior and interior of the barn. So I did that and applied a brown wash, and then attached the barn for the final time. After that, I wanted to make sure that the barn did not appear like it floated above the ground, so I bumped up the groundwork where it was meant to make contact and made sure it worked up the sides. The barnyard was in need of some animals, so I added those, plus a beehive, and then blended those into the ground as well. Finally, to make this barn look worked in and out in the elements, I used some speckling with some oils to give the barn a more grimy and worked in feel. Also, all that mud would splash up onto the barn, making it sufficiently dirtier. Here I wanted to make the wood look a little bit more weathered in some areas, so I used a gray oil paint and then stippled and blended that in until it looked like faded edges of the boards. Another thing to note is that painting styrene is exactly like painting the plastic kits that you're used to. So you can use oil paint, you can use enamels, and of course acrylic, and that will not damage any of this. Here I'm just using another paint to highlight a panel to give it some more depth, and then I'm using an oil wash on the groundwork. The last thing I have to do is paint the wood black, and then I am ready to give this diorama away to its new happy home.
So what's going on?
I kind of threw my back out, and I need help lifting this box up.
We just need you to lift the box up.
Cole?
Cool.
Straight up if you don't mind.
Straight up?
Straight up, yeah.
Both sides carefully straight up.
Alright, ready?
Anything.
Ready?
Oh, that's awesome! Who? Holy shnikes. That used to be my little farm!
That is actually awesome.
That is cool as hell.
Cole, have you not seen
Holy
it at all?
shit.
No, I didn't even
I'm
send
so
the pictures.
happy.
Thank you so much for watching this. This was a little different, but I hope you learned something about working with styrene, and it inspires you to go out and just buy a few packets of something to add some detail to your next build, or try and scratch build something like this on your own. Next time we'll be back with a tank build. I've got some exciting plans for that, and I can't wait to see you then. Give it a like if you liked, subscribe if you can. See you next time.